Welcome, Maurizio. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Economic growth is gathering pace in southern Europe. What are the prospects? Do you see them as positive for the region? Are there any clouds on the horizon?
Well, as you said, economic prospects are good, generally for South Europe, for the Eurozone in general anyway, with Spain growing above trend and doing quite well, thanks to tourism for sure, but consumption, exports are doing quite well. Italy not growing less than, I would say, trend GDP growth. And when you talk about Italy, it's very important to consider the divide between the north, quite wealthy, I would say comparable to Germany, and the south that is struggling more. It's quite important to keep in mind. And generally, of course, there is something endogenous that is important in terms of issues like NPLs for the banks in Italy or the unemployment rate in Spain. But I would say if you want, the more important risks are just exogenous. Namely, could be a potential evolution of a policy towards more protectionist in the US, of course. A chance, not our main scenario, of a hard landing in China, and the monetary policy, of course. Yes, that's quite important for us that rates stay low. But in general, I would say the prospects are good.
And where do you see the best opportunities in southern Europe at the moment? Which regions, which sectors?
I would say if I can put Spain and Italy together, I say that offices and in the main cities, you would obviously say Milan and Rome in Italy, Madrid and Barcelona in Spain. I think this is a very good bet, but of course, as you see that pricing for prime, let's say, is quite keen today. I think it's quite interesting angle for me is value added in both markets. Don't forget that the crisis in South Europe was actually harder than the rest of Europe. So what happened that new development came to a kind of virtual halt. So the stock of offices nowadays is quite obsolete, especially in the center of the cities. What is good about Milan that the rental levels are such that doing value added is already a very viable solution. So taking obsolete stock and making it new. In Spain, we probably need the rents to go up a bit more, but of course I can see some potential as well. Another play that comes to my mind is, of course, is residential. And I would say that, especially in Italy, what you could say today is that there is an angle for converting old offices to residential, or even looking at old residential and making it anew. Yeah, and selling, because don't forget that Italy and Spain as well, they are not countries for renters, but you would sell probably to domestic people. So this for sure. Of course, the other sectors are also quite interesting, namely logistics. There's usually some scarcity of product in both countries, in Italy and Spain, and I suspect in Portugal as well. And so there is need to develop new product, especially because the current lag in terms of demand, in terms of retail sales, we talk about e-commerce. What do we expect? We expect a catch-up for both countries. We expect Italians and Spanish to spend more and more on e-commerce, and of course that will need supply of logistic premises. And Amazon is already active in this sense. And last thing about logistics, that yields in South Europe are generally much higher than in the North Europe. So it's even more attractive for investors.
And what about the alternative sectors like student housing? It was obviously boosted with demand from Spanish-speaking Latin American students, but do you think there's an opportunity there? Will Spain catch up with countries like the UK and Germany?
Of course there is potential, and of course I can see your point about demand for student housing. I still believe that the UK and Germany will attract more in terms of students. That's very important. What you need is that you need good universities, you need courses to be taught in English, And you need, of course, some kind of very good product, which is not up to a good standard in South Europe now. So what I think is, yes, potential, but to get to the size that makes it very, very interesting, we are not there yet. So I think that it will still be a kind of interesting niche, but of course not as important as major markets like offices.
There's a lot of talk, obviously, about Brexit at the moment. Do you see Italy, and I guess Milan in particular, benefiting from Brexit, particularly when you look at the office sector?
Well, okay, it's a £1 million question, I guess. But what do we know about Brexit today? It's probably almost nothing. And it will take a long time, I suspect, to be sorted out. Much more than 2 years. And anyway, the consequences for real estate are going to take even longer, because you cannot just take and leave. There are leases, there are different contingencies. I do not expect a stampede out of London. But of course, there will be some relocation. I expect companies to look at the different cities and from different industries and choose what is best for them. So you would argue that Luxembourg can have something in fund management. Paris could have something more in insurance. Banking could be more interested in Frankfurt. And of course, Milan could have his own share, a small share. But it will take time, and I'm not expecting really a significant relocation. Some companies, something could happen in Milan, probably the European, I think it's the Institute for Pharmaceutical, could be relocated there. But I would not bank on Brexit for Milan. Milan is going to grow, mainly due to business services doing better and growing, new economy, biotechnology, these kind of things. But I think we should focus on that.
And in terms of capital flows, we've seen South Africans invest in Poland, South Koreans invest in Germany. Do you see a new wave of international investors targeting Southern Europe? And if so, where do you see this new capital coming from?
Absolutely. We still see strong interest from North American investors and really increasing interest from Asians. And when I talk about Asians, I really talk about the different nationalities. This is probably what you normally see with Asian investors, that they first come to London, of course, because that's what they know better anyway, and then they start to cascade down to other countries. They start with France and Germany, but in 2016 we have seen even in transactions in the Czech Republic. So they have been active. There are some interesting examples in Spain. Spain is, if you want, is a bit more friendly because it's more transparent as a market. Italy is slightly more opaque. You need more kind of support on the ground. It's an interesting market, but you just have to know it, of course, and know it a bit better. And I suspect that there will be more and more of this. And with investors, Asian investors, becoming gradually more and more educated. But as I said, feet on the ground is quite important as well.
And Maurizio, in terms of the outlook for Southern European markets in general, do you see a positive outlook for 2017?
Yes, absolutely, yes. I think that probably your question is also about politics. What we expect, of course, is a bit of volatility around the main political events that we're going to have in Europe. But normally, this kind of events generate some volatility around the dates of elections, but the effects for the occupational market are normally are not really important in the long term. As I said before, it's quite important to keep it with the current cycle. So the economic cycle is very important because it drives vacancy, because it drives rental growth, and it ultimately drives the profitability. So in general, I would not expect any major problem in 2017. Just the volatility, but we are used to.
Good. Thank you very much for sharing your views with us today, Maurizio.
Thank you.